we were told at night if we were driving to be super wary anytime we stopped at a stop sign. So for instance, if there were any pedestrians around on the side of the street, not in front of you, don't stop, just drive through it. Just run the stop sign. A lot of times in South Africa, what they'll do is they'll wait for somebody to stop at the stop sign and then they'll run up with something super hard and they'll break the window and reach in and grab something. At traffic lights in the middle of the day, they'll have one guy at the freeway exit and then another guy down at the traffic light. And if somebody, for instance, is on the phone, then the one guy will call and say, hey, there's somebody on the phone, blue car. And the guy will wait for that car to come, and then they'll discreetly kind of walk in between cars and then just shatter the window, grab the phone, and run off. And so you have to be super careful at any kind of traffic lights, stop signs. There are individuals I served with that, got mugged multiple times at gunpoint, knife point. I did not, luckily. There were definitely some situations where I thought it might get a little hairy, but we were able to get out unscathed. Typically, if you're white, you don't go into a township, especially walking, especially after dark. And so if I were to go back there now, I would avoid townships after dark. But other than that, it's fairly safe. A lot of people carried multiple wallets on them, and we were told to always carry at least 20 Rand on our person to give to somebody in case you're mugged, and that's not a bad idea. Keep it maybe in a separate pocket or keep a separate wallet with 20 bucks in it, not really anything else important, maybe some business cards so it looks legit, and that way you have something to give the person so they don't search you more or do something worse. As far as driving and traveling, the freeways and stuff are pretty close to here, other than driving on the opposite side of the road. That was super weird at first. I guess the other thing I can say is watch out for pedestrians. Here it's a lot more controlled access on the freeways and on main roads. There, sometimes people will wander out in front of you, in the middle of the night. Well, we didn't drive in the middle of the night, but in late hours of the evening, be super careful of that. They call traffic lights over there robots, which is weird, It's like, yeah, pass the robot, take the next turn, and you're like, pass the robot? What are you talking about? That was pretty interesting. They call light trucks, smaller trucks, bakkies. That was kind of weird. One thing, if you were to go to South Africa, you'd notice right off the bat is that every residential house in town has, an 8-foot fence and either barbed wire, spikes, or electric wires running on top of them. And they'll have large gates. I thought that was extremely strange when I first got there. And then when I came back to the United States, it was extremely weird and odd to just see people without even fences. They just have grass to the sidewalk. That was weird. There is a fair amount of crime there, so it's justified. In townships, one thing that I thought was interesting, you'll often see houses, because of their humble situations, without any grass. They'll just be dirt. But a lot of times the people will sweep their dirt in kind of cool patterns, so it'll still, interestingly enough, it'll still look neat and tidy. Even though it's just, a dirt yard, it'll be neat and tidy and swept. Kind of fun and interesting. Other than that, I'd say it's like the United States in a lot of ways. If you go to a town there, aside from the fact that everybody has fences, you might think you're in the United States, besides the roads, driving on the opposite side. There was one experience I had where it poured and poured and poured. I mean, our apartment complex that we lived in had an electronic gate. That electronic gate, it flooded so bad that the electronics were underwater and the gate didn't work. So they had to take things apart and manually open it to get it out. You looked outside of our apartment, there was a river. Our street was a river, and so we had some serious flooding a couple times, that time being the worst. So I guess they're somewhat prone to flash flooding in certain areas there. Never in any danger because of it, but kind of crazy. If you were in a township, you might eat what they call a kota, which stands for a quarter. It's a quarter loaf. So they take a loaf of bread and they cut it in fours, and they give you a fourth and they cut part of it out and they'll fill it with whatever you want, depending on the price you pay for it, depending on what you want, you'll get a kota of your desire. Sometimes you'll put mashed potatoes in it, and then maybe some, Vienna sausage and some better sausage and maybe some hamburger, if you're really lucky. Most of them were greasy chips or French fries. So they'd throw French fries in there, they'd throw half sausage and maybe some egg, and cost you maybe 5 Rand, which is less than $1 American. Great lunch, super fattening. One neat place that I was able to visit was the Apartheid Museum. When the apartheid ended, the separation of whites and blacks ended. And so the Apartheid Museum showed, a lot of events, a lot of the history of South Africa, talked about Nelson Mandela and the great influence that he had, the many years that he spent in prison before apartheid ended, he became president. Other places I'd say are a must-see. There are several waterfalls that I was able to see that were beautiful and gorgeous, and the game reserves. I'd say if I were to go back, I'd spend most of my time in Kruger National Park, sleeping there overnight, going on game reserve exhibitions. Pretty neat. You see so many animals and you're just right out there with them in a Jeep. If you get out of your Jeep, you might get eaten, kind of thing. Pretty neat place to go and visit. A common dish there, they love to eat pop. Pop is kind of like grits, but instead of using yellow corn to make it, it's used with white corn, and it's kind of tasteless. Almost looks like mashed potatoes. Sometimes they serve it with a gravy, sometimes it's just kind of the pop and some sausage. Some of the foods that were interesting, I've eaten chicken feet. I ate machodu, which is cow intestines. On one instance, I ate goat head, which was interesting. It was literally, a head there. It was cooked, luckily, and it was cut right down the center. And so you would basically take the part of the head that you wanted and, dish up. So I had brains and eye and tongue and cheek. The machodu, one thing I could say about it, smelled terrible when it was cooking. There were many times we'd walk into a house and we'd walk through the kitchen and the smell was so bad it would just about gag you. Like I almost threw up several times. But the people loved it. It was great. It wasn't so bad after it was cooked. As far as traditions are concerned, the first thing that comes to mind are tribal traditions, where many of them involve worshiping their ancestors, for instance. A lot of tribal culture. There's, like I said, 11 official languages, and each language is attached to some group of people. Afrikaans, English, Zulu, Sotho, Tswana, those are all tribal, languages. And each one of those tribes has separate cultural aspects about them. I wish I could shed more light on them. There were definitely cultural dances that were kind of interesting that you'd see. One of the interesting things about South Africa is there's such a variety of people. You have people that, have an English accent that their ancestors came from England. You have people that are Afrikaans. They sound almost German or Dutch. And then you have the different tribes, which all vary to some degree. One thing that very much impressed me about people generally over there is the ability that they had to learn language. I met so many people, super poor, came from very humble backgrounds, came from not the best educational background, not the best schools, that could speak, 5 languages or 7 languages. They could speak English and Afrikaans and Zulu and Sotho and Tswana. And so that was extremely impressive.